Okay, hello, everybody. Welcome to the Cosmere Catch Up. I'm Chaz, normally known as Bookish Chaz, but I've taken a Cosmere styled moniker for this stream, and I am so excited to be joined by my good friend Nikhil from Shelf Esteem. If you have not checked out his channel, link is in the description below. Make sure you do that. Same with my buddy Karl here. His channel is Geek on My Sleeve. They have a lot of great content on the channel uh, uh, that I think eventually we're going to see some new content, but there's some great live stream material on his channel that you can check out. So if you're a nerd, especially if you like um, lit RPG and progression fantasy, you'll want to check out Carl's channel. So link is in the description for him as well. And I'm going to give these guys just a minute or two to tell us about themselves and maybe talk about your experience just in general with the Cosmere so far, and then we can move forward. Whichever one of you wants to go first.
Carl, you want to go first? Or...
Um, go right ahead, Nikhil.
Okay. First of all, thanks so much for having me, Chaz. It's just so nice to finally get to chat with you all, virtually here. And I know, Chaz, like you were one of the first booktubers who I got a chance to interact with, like when I joined maybe 8-9 months ago. So it's just a real thrill, and it's just great to finally meet you as well, Carl. And for me, it's I my day job is I'm a composer for film and television, and lately I've been specializing in book adaptations. So I worked on some music for The Wheel of Time and His Dark Materials, which was the HBO show. But I've always loved reading, and in 2019, I think it was, I discovered Wheel of Time. That was my gateway to fantasy, and then I quickly discovered Brandon Sanderson's work, and I just started eating it up. I read through the Wheel of Time series. I just loved the way he tackled those last three books, and then I was like, I got to see what else this guy's written. So I read Mistborn, loved it. I read that first trilogy, and then it was on to Stormlight, and then it was no turning back from there. So it's just he has a way of getting his hooks in you with his stories and his characters. So yeah, it's been a wonderful 5 years or so of being actively lurking on BookTube, and then finally deciding to turn the camera on and do a channel of my own and meet wonderful people like you all. So it's great to be here. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, you're welcome. Glad to have you, man. How about you, Karl?
Yeah, really appreciate the invite to hang out again. Chaz is just, I guess, our bookish social butterfly because he was one of the first booktube friends that I made, as well as my brother who also helps out with Geek on My Sleeve. And yeah, as Chad lovely plugged for us, a lot of our content focuses around kind of similar discussions like this, just meeting up with people, geeking out over different books. I'm sure it's the same for you guys, as passionate as we are about these stories and enjoy them. Not always as many, you know, nearby friends are as enthusiastic about it. So just love the booktube community and being able to kind of come and connect. And yeah, in regards to the Cosmere, Brandon Sanderson, Wheel of Time was also my first introduction to him. And I'd love to kind of pick your guys' brain just about that transition as well, because I was just so in love with the writing style of drawing a break. Was it oh George or
Robert Jordan?
Robert
Yeah.
Jordan? Thank you. I almost said George R. R. Martin, and that's Game of Thrones. So pardon the brain fart there. But yeah, like I know when Brandon took it over at first, it took me a while to really switch to his writing style. And I think like in the preface, You know, he really owned the fact that, like, hey, I'm not going to try to recreate his writing style. I'm going to lean into my own. And then beginning the book, it was so hard for me to transition into it. And then by the end of that book and to the next one, how he just really owned it and added to the magic system. I'm like, okay, I got to check out his other stuff. And I want to say Mistborn was also my first transition into the Cosmere, and it's kind of been a gateway for me to get other friends introduced into it because Mistborn in the first trilogy, you get that layer of magic. It's a lot of fun, but it's not nearly as overwhelming as like the Stormlight Archives, which, you know, when you show them that big old tomb, they're kind of like, you want me to read what now? Um, but yeah, love his writing style, love the little Easter eggs and everything that we get to see. I know we're supposed to avoid spoilers for this first part here, so I won't get too deep into it. But yeah, I'm looking forward to the discussion.
Cool, man. Thanks. I appreciate you sharing all that. And looks like, by the way, guys, if you have not met Elaine over at Cobalt Dragon, you really need to check out her channel as well. And it looks like she's doing a Wheel of Time group read this year. So,
Awesome.
yeah, there you go. Yeah, so a couple of guidelines real quick to start off with. We're going to keep this spoiler free for the first 20 minutes ish, somewhere around there. Just kind of talk about our overall experiences. You know, what, maybe talk about some things some books that haven't totally worked for us, some of the books we really like, different things like that. And then we'll give a warning at the end of that before we transition into full spoilers. So that will be a good method to go about this. So like Karl said, we're going to keep it spoiler free to start, and I'll just briefly talk about my channel. Now I've been on BookTube almost 6 years, and I discovered Brandon Sanderson before BookTube, starting with Mistborn, and then I had also read I believe I'd read Elantris and Warbreaker both before I started BookTube. So I was somewhat familiar with him, but I didn't come to him through the Wheel of Time like these gentlemen here, because I have not read the full Wheel of Time. In fact, I DNF'd it. So that's dangerous to say on BookTube, but yeah, I just wasn't feeling it, so I put it down, and I don't know if
Yeah.
I'll ever come back to it, but I heard that Brandon Sanderson did a marvelous job of finishing the series, and he's well known and well loved in the community, and so I was anxious to start reading him when I did. And at this point, I've read everything in the Cosmere, all the short stories, all the secret novels. I've completed the entire series, and now we're going to hit the ground rolling again because he's writing the next era of Mistborn, and he's got another secret project I think might come out next year, maybe called the Ember Dark, if I remember right. So he's got that coming out maybe next year, and he's doing a prose version of White Sand, which I'm kind of stoked about to see how that goes. So, because I've read
Okay.
White Sand, but I read the graphic novel, so now he's got that. So yeah, should be fun. You are most welcome, Elaine. So guys, let's talk about maybe our favorite books and maybe the ones that haven't worked so well for us. Does that sound like a good plan?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, man. Oh gosh, that's like picking your favorite children, right? Are we allowed to do that? Um, gosh. I really enjoy Stormlight Archive as far as the different series go. It could be just because I'm a sucker for a good classic like epic fantasy, as well as just you know, the character development there. I think a lot of people can really relate to just, the struggle, and then, seeing them kind of reforged in their own way, trying to think of how to navigate this properly without spoilers. Um, I'm going to have to pass to come back to which ones didn't work well for me. So I'll let you guys.
Sounds like a good plan.
Yeah, I also felt similarly, like Stormlight. I think if I had to choose my favorites, it would probably be Stormlight. For the same reasons, I think like the inner journey is always something fascinating to me. And I think like that's so much more, I feel like books as a medium give you way more insight into a character's inner journey than any other medium really can. And I feel like Brandon Sanderson explores that in a way that I don't see in fantasy at all, let alone the way he explores that, keeping everything spoiler free. I also felt like, Karl, to your point, I know you were mentioning about how there was a little bit of a transitional phase, like when reading those Wheel of Time books, because his writing style is different, even if he's trying to kind of do something in the spirit of Robert Jordan.
Mm-hmm.
Personally, I remember reading through the dreaded slog that everyone talks about in the Wheel of Time series, and I read through that books 8, 9, and 10 in particular, and I thought there were some bright spots in it, but I did feel a little bit like it was long in the tooth towards the end of that cycle. And then Knife of Dreams was definitely the 11th book was a redeeming one for coming back to a return to form. But I was actually anxious to see someone else take the reins and see what that would look like. As blasphemous as that may sound, I was excited by that prospect. So for me, book 12, which I think is called Gathering Storm, ended up being one of my favorite Wheel of Time books for that reason. Is just like it just interjected a different energy into what is a long story. And I just imagine, making a 15-book series, no matter how good a writer, it's just like hard to keep it epic and amazing the whole way through, right? So,
Right.
So yeah, I really did actually really appreciate that. And I also loved Mistborn Era 1. I think probably the ones that I wasn't as keen on, the reasons I would probably be talking about them would be more spoilery. But trying to see how if I can if I can say any part of this without, well, I guess I'll say is like, some of the later Stormlight archive books, like I love the first 3. I actually really liked the 4th one when I reread it. There's certain things about the direction of the series, where it's going to go from here, and even some of the things that were explored in the last entry that were, I would love to hear all your thoughts about that at some point as well, because I felt like there were certain things I really liked about it, but I also felt like kind of some of the directions were not exactly what I had hoped for with the series. I'm still interested in seeing what the 6th one is, but I'm not necessarily as excited as I was for book 5 or something.
Right, I get that.
Yeah.
And interesting to that point, Adarsh here is asking us about Wind and Truth, and I kind of had a very similar experience with Wind and Truth. It just and maybe part of it is I'd hyped it up in my own personal mind for what I was expecting, and then I ended up being let down. So it was a good book. It's not a downer by any means. It's a good book. It just didn't quite meet my expectations, and having read everything in the Cosmere, the Stormlight, like with you, Karl, and you, Nikhil, the Stormlight archive is one of the best parts of the Cosmere. And I think my favorite of the entire Cosmere right now is still Mistborn Era 2. That was just a real highlight for me. And that's an unpopular opinion too, because most people don't like. Most people I've talked with don't like Mistborn Era 2, but I loved it. So, but I've had a really good experience with pretty much everything in the Cosmere. Stormlight Archive, my favorite books are Words of Radiance and then Oathbringer after that. and I hate to say this because I really do want to stress that it's still a good book, but I think Wind and Truth is my least favorite.
Mm.
There's no books in the Cosmere that I hate. I'll put it that way. There's none of them that I dislike, but yeah,
I
that's
agree with that.
on the list for me.
Yeah.
Do you guys feel, and I don't want to completely derail the conversation, that part of it is like the books, when going into it, like the promises or the expectations that you get from the author, and that maybe with like book 5 it shifted kind of like direction a bit to where, like, I don't know, I kind of felt like I enjoyed it, but Brandon had maybe his own agenda to where it wasn't quite the same kind of promise or expectations for the first 4 books.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Or, yeah.
I
I
definitely feel that.
Yeah, same. I felt like, a lot of things, which was interesting because the 5th one was touted as the end of arc 1. So everybody was thinking about this being a real kind of a final book in this arc, right? Like kind of this how
Right.
guys are hyped up or whatever. And actually, ironically, I felt like some of them, there were, in terms of volume of concepts introduced, I felt like this one was very heavy in that. Like a lot more new things were introduced than old things resolved in the way that you would have expected in the first 3 books, the way it was headed, like you said, Carl. So I
Yeah.
similarly, yeah.
Yeah, I feel that as well. And yeah, I'm definitely excited for book 6, but um, yeah, I'm just not sure what to expect. I mean, there's some things that we know to expect now,
Hmm.
because of the endings for, um, well, I don't want to say the endings, the changes for some characters at the end of the book,
Right.
but
Right.
but yeah, so it does leave some anticipation for book 6, which we're not going to get for probably 9 years. That looks like.
Yeah.
Is that the timeline?
Yeah, he's talking. I think he said like 2033, 2034, something like that.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, so it's going to be a while,
Yeah.
and I think maybe that's intentional for marketing as well, because there's supposed to be a 10-year time gap in the between the first and second arcs.
Oh.
So
Mm.
that could be intentional, but I don't know.
I also know
Uh,
that some recent interviews with Brandon Sanderson, and he did seem pretty tired from the whole experience of writing this book, because he was saying like, I need a break, you guys.
oh yeah.
Imagine like with all the hype and everything, and like this Dragonsteel con, it's like the first Dragonsteel
Mhm.
next and everything. It's like all converging to this moment. I could just
Yeah,
imagine he was under to deliver this thing. So
yeah. And the
He,
sheer scope of these books compared to the other books he writes,
right.
I mean,
yeah,
these are just massive tomes, like you mentioned earlier, Carl. It's just
Right.
writing those has to be exhausting. Yeah, yeah.
And he's a workhorse, not just, the little bit I've heard about his schedule, the amount of time he puts into writing, and then also managing the business, managing everybody else. Seems like he's constantly streaming plus teaching. As disappointed as I am, I can respect stepping away. I much rather him be refreshed, enthusiastic about it, take the time to do some of the outlines. Mm, it- I think we can all think of different book series that we've read where, there's different themes or subplots, and you get all excited about seeing it wrapped up, and then all of a sudden later in the series you're like, well, what happened with this? Like, what happened with that?
Hmm.
And um, so far, so much of the Cosmere has been so well weaved in together, that much rather him take the time to polish it, even though we have to wait a decade for it.
Yeah, yeah, I agree. Same here.
yeah,
Yeah.
The only Sanderson Elaine has read is Wheel of Time. I will say you're in for a treat
yeah,
if you read Sanderson's Cosmere or other stuff. He's quite good.
And Wheel of Time was pretty early for him too, right? I feel like he only had what, like 3 or so books published at that point when he took on
Right.
Wheel of Time.
Mm-hmm.
I think you're right. What was it?
Maybe
Elantris,
even less.
Mistborn, and
Yeah.
maybe that way. Yeah.
I think Elantris, Mistborn, and maybe the Rhythmatist as well.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Because it was
Which
pretty
I
early.
haven't read the Rhythmatist, but yeah, I think those were the only ones he had at that time. But
Yeah.
Elantris is an overall good book as well. And he's doing 2 more Elantris sequels as well. So
Right.
he's got a lot on his plate.
That will be interesting. I know we didn't come back to it, but is that technically part of the Cosmere, Elantris?
It
Okay.
is. Yeah.
Okay.
It
And
takes place on the planet Cell, I believe it's
Yeah.
called.
Mhm.
Yeah.
okay. And it's been forever for me since I've read it, so forgive me if I'm butchering terms, but that's the one with kind of like the undead magic, or am I thinking of a different one?
No, you're on the right
Okay.
track. It's got it's got the I forget what it was called, the disease or something that they contracted that made them be siphoned off across the other side of the wall and put
Right.
in this one part of the city that just isn't touched. Kind of like leprosy almost.
Right.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And for my pick as far as like maybe least favorite, that would probably be up there. It's still a good book. I know that was one of his first published.
Mm-hmm.
Granted, if I'm remembering my Brandon Sanderson lore, he had completed at least a dozen books before he got one published, including Stormlight. He completely reworked it.
Mm-hmm.
It's still good, but to go
Yeah.
back and answer your earlier question, that was probably towards the bottom of my list for the Cosmere.
Fair enough. And it is for a lot of people. A lot of people either slightly like Elantris or really don't like it.
Mhm.
Yeah. Yeah.
I think I know I've been in the minority in many cases with my enjoyment of Elantris. So,
Mhm.
but yeah.
I actually rather liked it as
Okay.
Okay. Yay.
yeah. I read it actually recently. I think it was probably maybe a year ago or something, year and a half ago, relatively recently. But I remember it being because I'd heard from a lot of people that it's his weakest entry, this and that. So I was going in with that expectation already. So maybe it's from that. But I did like the themes in it quite a bit.
Yeah. It's still a good book, but I think kind of to add on with what you were saying there, and also with how we viewed book 5, like kind of the expectations and promises going in. Yeah, and I know a lot of times I try to readjust sometimes when I'm coming to a new series, like, okay, let's check expectations, like at least with like a Brandon Sanderson, you always know you're going to have some awesome magic, some great storytelling, even if it's not something you're super excited about. Still a good, unique story.
Totally.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and it'll be interesting to see now that he's got the other 2 sequels planned, and now that there's the crossovers happening with with the Stormlight Archive and stuff. It'll be interesting to see if that gives a fresh perspective on the first book too.
100.
But
Speaking of which, like just thinking about book 5, Wind and Truth, and really Lost Metal, I think is kind of where you started to see a lot more versions, and that's also a little different than first books of these series started. So it's interesting to see like which is I can see why people love it. I think there's certain aspects of it I like, and there's certain aspects of it that are not quite gelling with me personally. And with Wind and Truth, like when I was first reading it, it was really high on it. I was, and that's probably also the anticipation of this book coming out and everything. And I was like really enjoying it. I think one other thing, besides, so this wouldn't be spoilery or anything, but one other aspect of that book that didn't quite gel with me was actually the same thing that I absolutely love Brandon Sanderson for in his other books is his exploration of mental things like that, which I feel like in his earlier Stormlight Archive works, it was done with a little bit more subtlety, and
Mhm.
and so there was kind of a gradual unfolding of this stuff, whereas in the fifth book, like that was kind of at the center of a lot of things,
Hmm.
and it felt a little bit more on the nose to me, I guess you could say, when some of that stuff was like some of those topics were broached. So that was just something that sometimes took me out of the story, and whereas before it brought me further into the story. I don't know if that makes sense, but that was just my
Yeah,
thought going
No, I think
yeah,
it totally makes sense.
it
Yeah.
does make sense. Yeah. Uh-huh.
I remember seeing some earlier interviews too, related to that, where I think he maybe, since he was kind of new to it, and I don't know if insecure is the right word, but he's like, hey, I don't have necessarily firsthand experience with this, so maybe he was a bit more intentional with kind of
Mm.
um, the soft touches. And again, just from what I've seen with interviews, really respect the fact that he does his research and he'll get, source people and et cetera, to where maybe, now later on, because he had done that research, he kind of maybe felt more confident going about it a different way. But at the
Yeah.
same time, like I shared a lot of similar observations with you where, and it's the same thing that you see with like writing, like the foreshadowing, the kind of light touches, the hinting without it being, hey, here it is, like right up front, like you said, on the nose,
Yeah.
Yeah.
um, can kill the immersion a little bit.
Yeah.
Um, but
100%.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
Really, really, don't want to get too premature and push to jump into the spoilers. So I'm looking forward to the second part of it when we can go ham and break out all the spoilers on it, because I'd love to get your guys' perspective
Yeah.
on that. I mean, it doesn't have to be just about the Stormlight, even though that's up there for all of us, all the Cosmere.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Uh,
Definitely. Yeah. I think most everything else in the Cosmere is kind of feeds into Stormlight in a way that kind of makes that the preeminent series, and
hmm
he's even gone as far as saying that's his magnum opus. That's his whole reason uh, for doing this whole thing to begin with, is to bring this world into fruition. So
Right.
so yeah, yeah, it's good, and I think we're probably okay. We're almost at the 30-minute mark in the stream. We're probably okay to start talking spoilers, unless you guys have a couple of other things you want to touch on with non-spoilers. But
Mm, I'm trying to think. Maybe I'm just a bit excited to get into the spoilers and hear your guys' thoughts about, because I feel like the last couple books in the Cosmere, we're finally starting to see, the all the different cork boards of how everything's interconnecting, and yeah,
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 all right, yeah, sounds good. Well, I'm good with that. I just want to let the audience know, even though this is going to be a spoiler discussion from this point on, we are not going to spoil the secret novels, and we are not going to spoil Arcanum Unbounded, which is the collection of short stories. So everything else is up for grabs. Technically, there are some books that are in Arcanum Unbounded that also have their own separate editions, like the Emperor,
Emperor.
the Emperor's New Clothes, is it? Or
Emperor's.
it, the Emperor's what? I'm sorry.
Emperor's Soul, I
Emperor
think.
Soul. Thank you.
Yeah,
I'm,
yeah,
I'm confusing it with a movie. So
yeah,
there,
yeah.
the Emperor's Soul, and also the one where we meet Lift for the first time.
Edge
Uh,
Dancer.
Edge Dancer, yeah. So those also have their own separate editions. So have you guys read those?
I have.
You have, okay.
I
And
haven't.
you haven't,
But
okay.
I
No
think
worries. So we'll kind of leave those on the sidelines as well. I don't personally think that it's extremely important to touch on those in a spoiler stream, so I think we're okay.
Help keep me honest there. That way I don't slip up because I know there's some stuff that come out later in the books that are kind of revealed if you read the Arcanium early because that dropped several years ago now. But then like
Yeah,
some of those facts you learn, in the Mistborn world and the Stormlight world, these
yeah.
later books.
right.
Um, but yeah. By all means, cut me
Right.
off if I derail it too much.
Okay, yeah, cool. And I will say that even though Lift has like an origin story in Arcanum Unbounded,
Hmm.
um, Nikhil, since you read the Stormlight Archive,
Yeah.
you've already learned everything about Lift that's important to know. To be honest with you,
That's kind of what I figured a lot of the times too. Is like some of
yeah,
the
Yeah.
she's not a major character, and I don't think. I mean, if you get a chance to read Edge Dancer, that's cool, but I don't think you're necessarily missing out on anything important in that story. So
totally,
More
totally.
more lore, more flavoring, but not too
yeah,
many key details. Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. So, well, good. Well, let's go ahead and talk spoilers. And like I said, everything else is up for grab. We've got Stormlight Archive, we've got Mistborn Eras 1 and 2, Warbreaker, Elantris, and I guess that's pretty much all we can. Oh, White Sand. If you read White Sand, the graphic novel, we can touch on that as well. Although that also I don't feel is extremely uh, intertwined with the Cosmere as of yet. It
Yeah.
still kind of stands on its own.
Yeah. I
Yeah.
I did the audio adaptations to that, which were fun. I can't remember if I've gotten through the third one just yet, but as fun as it is, it still seems they're kind of in their own, world for now.
Yeah.
Um, so yeah.
Did you read White Sand, Nikhil?
No, I actually haven't read those as well.
Okay.
Yeah. So good looking out. I forgot. I
Yeah.
forgot the.
Yeah. No worries. The only so you've encountered a little bit, just a little taste of it in Wind and Truth, because
Okay.
uh, the black sand that Hoyd plays with in the book, and
That's
that's all I'm
right.
going to say.
Okay.
But
Cool.
the,
Yeah.
the black sand that he's playing with is from that world. So
Okay.
yeah, yeah. But
Do you
other
all,
than that, I'll keep it off the table.
do you all ever have this problem? I know, like for me, sometimes it's like there's years that go between reading some of these books, and there's
Yeah.
some connections, and some of them run so subtly as well. And now we're seeing,
Hmm.
and now when in truth, where you're seeing these massive convergences of things, but there's so many Easter eggs. It's like I can't even keep track of them all.
Mhm.
Yeah, and in a way, it's kind of nice to where it's more Easter egg than like you're really missing out. Like you could still follow the story without the other parts.
Mhm.
Um, the Cosmere for me is very much a comfort listen because I do a lot of audiobooks. So like you were talking about, they're so subtle that when we went back to do, I want to say it was like the last book of Era 2 of Mistborn, there were so many more things I was catching because I had recently re-listened to some of the other books to where it's like, oh wow, like that's this faction. Oh wow, like they're from here. And it's like, um, one of the things I really enjoy about reading and listening is you really get a walk in their shoes and view from the narrator's perspectives. And as we're getting further into the Cosmere and seeing the different factions, it's really hard to know like who are you rooting for, who's quote unquote the good guys versus the bad guys, because they all have their motivations, right? Now that
Right.
we're in the spoilers, like, oh wow, like the Ghost Bloods, if you just were in Stormlight and you're at, book 2, you're like, oh my gosh, these guys, like, they're just evil pulling the strings and whatnot. And then, you get further into Mistborn, you're like, oh wow, the Ghost Bloods, like, like we're kind of rooting for them, like different factions of good or evil, or
Yeah, I'm glad you brought that up, Carl, because I was actually going to ask that if you caught the the different perspectives on the Ghost Bloods depending on what series you're reading. Yeah, in one book they're kind of the good guys, but more of like a chaotic good, and then on the
That's a perfect way to put it.
and then in the Cosmere they're just causing complete chaos, and they're assumed to be the bad guy or part of the bad guys. So yeah, that was interesting. I'm glad you brought that up because I was going to ask if you guys caught that. Yeah.
Yeah. Did you want to chime in, Nikhil, or?
No, I agree. I mean, I remember, was it? I'm trying to remember now exactly when the Ghost Bloods were introduced in Mistborn. Was it Era 2?
Yes.
I believe so.
It was in Era 2.
Technically in Era 2, yes. Mm-hmm.
That's okay, cool. I was just trying to get all my timelines right.
There's so much. It's hard to keep it all together, but yeah.
100%. And now with Mistborn Era 3 going into the 1980s or something, who knows,
Yeah,
right.
That.
But yeah, no, I felt the same, and I kind of love characters that have varying motivations, where you kind of see one cross section of them and you go, huh, I guess I'm rooting up against these people. And then you see a different cross section, like, oh, I'm rooting for these people. And then you put them together, like, now I'm not really sure what to feel. And I think that feeling is an amazing feeling because you can really hypothesize in many different ways. Like you could look at it from different angles, and both are actually valid. They're like a cross section of truth,
It's so much more relatable than the Disney good and evil, right? Like they're you can relate to their motivations, and it's not all black and white, right?
Yeah.
And yeah, just one of the things that made Mistborn Era 1 so fun was like Kelsier, right? He wasn't the typical mentor, right? He was a bad influence with his own goals, his own motivations, everything else. And then we see that transition into the Ghost Bloods. And correct me if I'm misremembering, but it's like overall we have like these core objectives, but then outside of that, you guys can go, fulfill your own agenda, your own goals, your own means, which allow them to kind of be more chaotic good, if you will, or even chaotic neutral, right? When we get later into like Stormlight with, is it Rays, am I thinking of, or whatnot? The kind of the one that tries to mentor Shallan, and he is doing all this stuff to kind of like overthrow and mess with politics, and it's like how are these, how can we root for these guys when they're causing so much chaos, but like the value of like the greater good, like the same things that Kaladin has conflict over, right? Like, is it the greater good, or do I protect everybody, right? And so it's really interesting to see the major factions at play, as well as like the Radiants with their O's, and they have to, like, they don't have that flexibility that the Ghost Bloods do. And yeah, it's just so much fun seeing it all come together.
Yeah, and it's really interesting, that particular question. The do you preserve the greater good, or do you preserve the people that are closest to you? That really got driven home to Yasna in this newest book. Like,
Mm-hmm.
You know, she was really she's kind of that lawyer type, right? She just like stands up there and commands with her presence, and yet um, Odium just trounced
Yeah.
her.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I love that interaction. That was one of the highlights of the book for me. Was,
Yeah.
she was sure that she not only had the answers, but that they were clear in her mind. Like
Mhm.
her was clear in her mind, and there was no disputing it. And like
Right.
the way Odium slash Teravangian, just completely dismantles her concept, her own confidence in her own truth.
Oh, yeah.
Was a brilliant. That interplay was brilliant, I thought.
Yeah, definitely. And it's interesting to think about, like if uh if Odium was still possessing the body of Rays, how different would that interaction have been? Because I think she could have won over Rays,
Yeah.
but Teravangian is a whole different level of thinker and uh,
Mm-hmm.
manipulator, and yeah, so that was really interesting. Uh, he just threw a whole wrench into the system once Odium switched bodies.
And also his
Yeah.
motives were entirely different. Like
Oh
Teravangian
yeah.
motivations are so different that they don't, like, it's almost like, I forget who references it. It might have been Dalinar or something at one point, but basically the idea that like his motivations just don't align with, he's not going to see the world the way the rest of them do. So
Right.
he's
Mm-hmm.
a fairly different game to them,
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely.
which is
Yeah.
really, I'm always fascinated by that just in general, like in the real world, is like, two people playing either a mind game or something. It's like whatever, like if there's people fighting each other or whatever it is, and it's
Hmm.
like one playing by their own set of rules, then it changes the whole dynamic, and it's like, want to overcome that. Like, I just find that concept fascinating, which I love the way that was explored in this.
Hmm.
Yeah. Yeah.
So
Yeah.
cool.
Most definitely. Yeah. Yeah. Teravangian is such an interesting character. I did not like him. I still don't fully like him. Even love to hate him. I just don't like him at all. And so when it got to the end of Oathbringer, I was like, oh man, finally we're gonna get rid of this guy. And then he gets resurrected as Odium. I'm like, wait, what?
Yeah.
Right.
No, you mean I'm stuck with him for another two? Or wait, no, that was Rhythm. Wait,
Yeah, that was Rhythm of
that
War.
was Rhythm of War. I'm sorry.
You're
Yeah.
fine.
Anyway, yeah, I thought we were finally going to get rid of him, and then here he is resurrected as Odium. I'm like, oh,
But as much as you said you don't like him, you can at least like understand him, right?
yeah.
And respect
Oh, yeah.
where he's coming from, which, I just think again, hats off to Brandon Sanderson for the relatable characters and, villains and, all that.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
it's so much easier to really like hate or dislike him if you can't relate to him at all, but then you get where he's coming from, right? Like in his
Yeah.
own way. Um, like the battle that Kaladin goes through, the us versus them, he has he has a much easier um, go about as like the us versus them. Like I much rather protect my tribe than who cares? I can conquer the world, right? And
Right.
um, that's where Dalinar, Yasna, and everybody gets tempted to be like, okay, well, you know, do I you know take this sacrifice or sacrifice my values to go out and conquer the Cosmere, to help protect us.
Right.
No, like the Radiants stick to their truths, their oaths.
Hmm.
Um, yeah.
I was I want to touch on something that I found very interesting, and I think it's potential for the future of the Cosmere, and that's reunification of Adonalsium. Because we're seeing it happen kind of in stages. You know, we've got Harmony on Scadrial now,
Mm-hmm.
and now we've got Retribution on Rashar. And it kind of makes me wonder what other kind of mergings of the shards are we going to see, and how that's all going to play out. Um, I personally am kind of worried about Harmony because, as we saw in Mistborn Era 2, he's already weakening.
Yep.
Right.
Like his faculties are scattering more and more. So I'm kind of worried if he's ripe for a takeover, so to speak, and that concerns me.
It's interesting, and that was Harmony was the first one we got to witness through Mistborn, and I remember the first time going through it, I'm like, oh hey, like first impressions, this is going to make him so much more powerful because creation, destruction, and whatnot. But then, like you said, by the end of the second arc or series, we see how limiting it is, and every time he makes a compromise, how much weaker he becomes.
Right.
And as much as we love to hate Kelsier, like the necessity for him to be there to kind of keep his friend in check, yeah, it's going to be interesting.
Yeah.
I'm also that's a really good point. Like I'm also curious where we'll start to see some of those answers. Like if we'll see it in future Mistborns, or if we'll kind of start to see it more in the Stormlight Archive, and kind of like where those convergences are going to happen, like in the sense of now that they, as Sanderson says, the gloves are off, right? So lost metal, right? So I would imagine you're going to kind of get answers maybe twofold, or even from different perspectives.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. I would think we will probably see more in the third Mistborn, with just how much more. Like the first one, we're very much just in the Mistborn world, and then the second arc, we see it more intertwined. But now, all the different factions and everything, and it's interesting because we get to see a bit of kind of how the time dilation works towards the end of book 5 of the Stormlight Archive. So it's kind of hard for me to really speculate like how that's going to work with this next time hop in Mistborn. Yes. Will it be that much more accelerated? Will it not be? It'll be interesting. And from a marketing perspective, it's brilliant on Brandon Sanderson's part, because if you're just in the Mistborn series, you get in the second arc and you start the third arc, you're like, well, I gotta understand the Cosmere now. So pick up Stormlight Archive, pick up everything else, right?
Right. Exactly.
Yeah.
Why don't you? Right?
Yeah. Right. Okay. I guess I need more books.
Yeah. I agree. Yeah, it's gonna be very interesting to see how that plays out. I just I think that I think that something's definitely going to happen with that next era of Mistborn. I'll be curious to see what Harmony looks like at that stage of the game. Yeah. And it'll be interesting to see if we see more shards unifying in different places in the Cosmere. So yeah, I'll be curious about that. What have been some of your favorite crossovers that you've seen, or like little Easter eggs and world hopper glimpses, that type of thing?
I mean, our boy Hoyd slash Wit slash that was one of my favorite things about book 5. Finally getting some answers about him and his backstory.
And more questions as a result.
Of course, we can't have any simple answers, right? We have to understand why he decided not to become a god, quote unquote. But as we're learning, there's different tiers of deity, right? There's the capital G, and then the lowercase g, and then the GG if you got two shards, or so on and
Right.
so forth. But yeah.
Yeah, I love that. Yeah, I think Wit is probably my favorite in terms of crossover. I also did like the Tydakar mentions, and the like Kelsier's involvement in the Ghost Bloods, and
Yes.
how it paints a different picture of him compared to what I loved about him in Mistborn: The Final Empire. That's like one of the things I'm most intrigued about, to see in future books. Is to see more about his motivations, kind of his involvement in various aspects of the Ghost Bloods, and also the Cosmere at large. Like I get the feeling we'll probably see a lot more of him.
Yeah, I get that feeling too, and he's especially one that the motivations are painted differently depending on which series we're reading in, because he's very much painted as a kind of a savior type in the Mistborn series, especially in Mistborn Era 2, and I think part of that comes because that's his homeworld kind of thing.
People straight up worship him as a
Yeah,
god,
people
right?
worship him. They have certain expectations of what he's like, and then in Stormlight, he just seems like he's thirsting for power. His one of his main motivations is to bring Stormlight off world.
Yeah.
It's the end of the book kind of put a kibosh on that, but
Right.
his his motivations are, he wants to bring other types of investiture, I guess, to the different worlds, and we don't know what his motivations behind that are.
He was also more in the background in Era 2. Do you think by the time we get to Era 3, it'll just be like we'll just see the gods, very much more involved, the whole Ghostblood faction and him kind of pulling the strings more so? Or do you think he'll still, at least writing style wise, be more in the backgrounds, more of his agents kind of acting?
I think it's probably going to be a good mix, myself personally. What about you, Nikhil?
Yeah, I don't know. If I could have it the way I want, I would
Well,
want him to be more in the foreground, just because I really am intrigued and want to know more.
Sure.
same.
Yeah, I could imagine a world where he's more in the background in, say, Era 3, and then he's more in the foreground in the final, in the back half of the Stormlight books,
Mm-hmm.
and or vice versa. Like, it could be for good reason, in terms of like the politics that he has to play in that particular, or in that, from that particular vantage point. It might be better
Yeah.
lurk in the shadows and kind of pull strings from the background in reference to one of those. I don't know, thought.
Yeah, I go back and forth. I think it would be very interesting to kind of see him in the forefront, as well as then that would have more of the conflict that he has with Harmony, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because we see at the end of the second era, they're really walking that fine path, right?
Yeah.
Like we're still buddies, like we're still besties, but we're both willing to fight you if we have to, right? And I
Right.
feel in a lot of ways Harmony's trying to walk that line where, because he holds the two shards, he's compelled to do things, but then at the same time also limited by it. So by him, being more passive, is that allow him to allow Kelsier to maybe do what he wants to do, or will the shards force him to confront him for the sake of not losing the power, as well as the little victories in the short term versus that Cosmere perspective? I just, I'm a sucker for getting to see, just the scale that the gods operate on.
Mm-hmm.
Not necessarily this series, but but I know I've kind of talked about it with Chaz, where um, one of my first series that I really got into was the Dragonlance series by Margaret Weiss and Tracy Hickman. I'm probably butchering their names, but they kind of follow a similar pattern where you don't really get to see the gods as much, but then all of a sudden they start walking amongst them, and in the later series you see the gods kind of going to war and everything, and then just the scale that they operate on. I feel in the Cosmere we're kind of getting to that point where we're now clearly seeing the scale of what the gods are trying to do as Odium tries to escape and conquer the Cosmere. So I'd love to see more of the shards at the forefront, as well as just the other shards, right? I feel like there's a handful we haven't even seen yet. So I wonder if we'll get to see more of those over the next 9 years before the Stormlight Archive. And then, all that.
Yeah, you're right. There's several that we haven't really touched on or spent much time with. Like I think adversity is one. Yeah, there's a few. So it'll be interesting to see. And I kind of wonder with Kelsier slash Thadakar what his who his allegiance is to. And I say that because he's spiked. He's got the spike through his eye, very similar to an Inquisitor, the Steel Inquisitors.
Right.
And so that makes me wonder about his allegiances and his motivations, because
Right.
is somebody pulling his strings?
That's a good point.
And and part of the reason I think that is because we've got Marsh, who is also spiked. Of course, they're crystal spikes, and I'm very curious to where that comes from. But he's still spiked in a way that gives him investiture and everything, and so his motivations. Well, maybe he's not totally evil, but I feel like he is. I feel like his allegiance is not to not to the side of the Radiance and such like that. I feel like he's definitely on the side of whatever overarching enemy is at play here. But it just makes me question Kelsier's allegiances and everything too. So, but
yeah, there's a calculating aspect to his personality that wasn't evident in Mistborn Era 1.
Yes.
It was calculated, but not in the way that makes you feel uncomfortable, if that makes sense.
Right.
I get it.
Yeah.
Yeah. You're very right on that, Nikhil. Good point there. Very, very cold and calculating.
Yeah.
For sure.
And I feel like maybe not directly part of that, but that's one of the things that I've enjoyed about getting later into the series. A lot of other books, we get to see kind of the character development over, more of a traditional span, right, of years or potentially decades, where now we're getting into the centuries of character development, right? So it's interesting to see, Marsh and Kelsey are kind of, how their characteristics are either becoming stronger or more dampened, or as well as, just before I forget it, I love seeing the further along we go, the magic systems blending and compounding, and how that's all working, right? Because it's all quote unquote investiture, but how it manifests in the different worlds is different, right? Whether it's light or metals, or and then, or the spikes, and now the further we get along, how people are able to use and abuse the different powers and abilities.
Right.
Yeah.
I'm curious about one thing with you guys. is it just me, or is there are the breaths from Warbreaker, from the world, I forget the name of the world right now, but are the breaths from that universe one of the stepping stones to collecting investiture from different sources? Like, I got the impression that when Odium tricked Hoyd at the end of Rhythm of War and stole some of his breaths, it seems like the breaths are very coveted, and I kind of wonder if those are kind of like a storage, if you will, for different types of investiture, and that's why.
Interesting.
Because up to this point, other than people in the world of Warbreaker and what's his name, Vasher, I can't remember what he's called now, but anyway, other than that world and Vasher specifically, Hoyd is the only one who has breaths at this point. Or am I wrong? I might be wrong on that. So
I'm trying to. Yeah.
in Stormlight, and I might be misremembering, but the sword trainer or whatnot that trained Kaladin, isn't he also from the same universe? Was it Zyle?
yeah, what's that?
Zyle?
Yeah, I think that's actually Vasher.
Oh, okay,
Yeah,
yeah, okay,
I think that's his Rasharan name.
right.
Yeah. So that's him. Yeah, and of course, he originally had the black sword.
Right, and we get a little bit through him where he talks about more of a scientific approach. And again, I'm not remembering it right, but he's like a grade 2 or a grade 3 invested being, right?
Yeah.
And the Warbreaker series, like that's how they achieve godhood, right? The more breasts they have.
Right.
And we see with Hoyd / Wit that he is, God with a little g. So it makes sense with his breaths that, what grade of invested being is he? Um, but yeah, that's a good perspective / thing I didn't think about. The other ways for them to kind of quote unquote use that magic to capture investiture from other realms.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, same. I mean, I think when, yeah, it was the end of Rhythm of War when Wit had his breaths taken, right?
Mm-hmm.
And he had like that blank spot in his memory and everything.
Right.
Yeah.
And yeah, and I'm thinking, like, I remember reading that and then reading some of the things that happen in Wind and Truth and feeling like, oh, there's something to this that feels like it has a universal value across these different worlds. But I did in terms of the investiture, like you were saying, Chaz. So that's actually a really good point. But it does seem it could be the way. Yeah.
It'll be interesting rereading some of the books from that, like thinking about that as well. And I'm trying to remember. It's been forever since I've read Warbreaker. But is obtaining the breath something that's like universal? Like, can just about anybody do it, or do you have to have certain abilities? Because if it's something that could be quote unquote learned, then that would mean that it can happen in any realm, right? Where in Mistborn, you're either born with an ability or you're not, right? You can either, unless you get one of those things from the end of the first series where you could become a Mistborn like Ellen did. You either have it in your blood or you don't, right? So if the breaths is something that anybody can learn and obtain, that could get really interesting. And I just don't remember if it was something, because I knew from what I remember, like there's the classes, right, where there's the gods who have all those breaths, and then they become that level of investiture. Um, but yeah, that could be game breaking in a way, right? If
Yeah.
just learning how to do that, um, how the arms race of the different factions.
Yeah. Yeah, it's been a while since I've read Warbreaker as well, and so I can't remember exactly if I want to say that it can be learned, but I don't remember for sure.
I remember
So
there being rules, I think, like if you had a certain amount of breaths, usually that was reserved for a particular type of person or something like that.
Right.
If I um but I also remember it being like, oh, you could lose your breaths, you could acquire more. So it was a fluid situation, if I remember
Right.
correctly.
Right. Right. That's interesting. I might have to bump that back up my reread list.
yeah, right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Do you guys
And
know if we're supposed to get more in that universe or not? Is he coming back to that?
Yeah, he is going to write a sequel to Warbreaker. I don't know if he's going to write a full trilogy out of it, but I know he's doing at least one sequel.
Okay.
Yeah,
Nice.
so we're probably going to get more there, and I'm assuming it's going to be heavy with crossovers.
Of course.
Because that's his thing now. Like you said, Carl, all the gloves are off now.
Yeah.
But yeah, that will be curious to see what else we get in that. And um, it was kind of funny seeing Hoyt in that book too, in his because he was like the mystic shaman in that book, just like that was such
Right.
a weird role for him, but I thought
yeah.
that was funny.
What'd you guys think of his and Yasna's romance? That first time that kind of surprised me a bit, but at the same time, for her being who she is personality wise, of course
Mhm.
she's going to, get in a romantic relationship with, you know, uh, God with a lowercase g.
Yeah, yeah, that does make sense for her character, and I kind of wonder if there's not some initial motivations in doing that like I'm sure it seems like she came to be fond of him,
Mhm.
but
Right.
I think maybe her initial motivations may have been like information gathering.
Yeah, like more transactional.
Yeah,
Yeah.
right. Yeah.
Yeah. She's also always operating on so many different levels, right? Like the
Yeah.
romantic component is just one of it. And like you said, the transactional information gathering is another element, as
Mhm.
well as, I need to keep tabs on you
Mhm.
is another element. But yeah,
Yeah. I kind of felt bad for him when she wrote him the Dear Hoyd letter.
Yeah.
I was like, oh man. Like, I mean, you had to kind of expect that it would happen. It's not a relationship that I could see lasting, but I did kind of feel bad for the guy.
right.
But he's been alive for eons at this point, so it's probably nothing new to him. I don't know, but
I
Yeah,
also
I mean,
yeah.
oh, go ahead, Nikhil.
But sorry, go ahead, Carl.
No, I was just going to add on to that, like just going off of the Roshar timeline, we're talking thousands and thousands of years, right? For
yeah,
Hoyd slash Wit. And that was after the death of another world.
yeah,
Yeah.
So yeah, truly one of the oldest beings that we have in the Cosmere.
Mhm.
right. What were you gonna say, Nikhil?
Oh no, I was just gonna say, I think from a logical standpoint, I totally could see them together, in terms of how they operate, Jasna's like personality as well and stuff. I think the way they were that relationship was introduced to us felt sudden,
Yeah,
and I think was
Right.
it in Rhythm of War that it was first introduced, if I remember. Or,
I think it might have been briefly right at the end. I don't remember.
okay, I feel
It
like I
sounds
remember
right.
before Wind and Truth.
I
Um,
mean,
but in
they
any
had,
case,
they had their flirting in their own way, right? The way that Wit flirts.
Right.
But I don't think it was anything official until much later.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Totally. For me, I'm always like when there's relationships in books, just like for me personally, I like to see kind of like a little bit more of a um gradual coming together.
Mhm.
And it was like already it's like, oh, this is happening, you know. So I think it was just like a second to adjust to it, and I was like, at first
Right.
I wasn't sure how I really felt about it, but then I was like, oh yeah, actually I could see that, you know.
Mhm.
Yeah. Yeah. Definitely very much their characters. I feel like Yasna, when she decides to do something, she does it.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
I thought the progression for Relaine and Renarin's budding relationship, I thought that was a much more believable pace, or well, I don't want to say acceptable because everybody's different, but it felt more natural than Hoyt and Yasna did.
Yeah.
Yeah. As well as very much in character for them. I think, one of my biggest complaints is, and we talked about it earlier, when the immersion gets destroyed, right? So
Mhm.
when all of a sudden the characters, quote, break character, but for them being kind of timid, both
Mhm.
dealing with their own fair share of rejection, um, really enjoyed kind of how Brandon Sanderson kind of covered that, you
Mhm.
know, explaining it from their points of view and everything. I enjoyed it. It was well done.
Mhm.
Um, yeah.
Yeah. As far as immersion is considered, I think like for me, the things that I struggled with were actually less about um, character motivations or, because he had built up so much of character foundations up to this point. I think there were
Mhm.
certain things that they would say that suddenly felt, and I'm sure this has been talked about, ad nauseum, anyways, on various discussions and things about Wind and Truth. But I did feel like there were certain things that were talked about where they're talking about like, oh, I'm his therapist, and so like certain lines that were one-offs that just went kind of took you out of it a little bit.
Right.
And it was ironic because it was like his addressing of those things were the same reasons that I love those Stormlight Archive books in the first place. It's just that there's that fine line between kind of just some subtle hints or kind of
Right.
subtext
Yeah.
maybe is the word. And
Right.
I just didn't feel that same level of nuance that I came to really. I felt like it gave those topics more impact for me personally when they were first visited. Whereas here, I felt like everyone was going through a mental health struggle at one point, even
Mhm.
Hmm.
the mental health struggles. And like, I think the thing that makes it interesting is when there's a couple characters that are going through it, and you really get to
Right.
explore what that is, because
Right.
not built the same, and not everyone's going to struggle with the same things for the same reasons. So I did
Mhm.
feel like there was a lot more of it, and not necessarily to serve the story ultimately.
Mhm.
Yeah.
That was a personal take on it. I don't know what you
Yeah,
guys
no,
think.
that's good. Yeah.
I agree with a lot of that, and I think one of the things that I appreciate about the earlier books were, while we still kind of followed everybody, we were able to really dial in on a handful of points of view, and I'm all for multiple points of view.
Mhm.
Um, but yeah, the book five, what was it? We were supposed to focus on Zeth, and we did. Um, and I'm trying to think what else is officially our point of view characters, but then, like you said, everybody had everything going on. I understand this is supposed to be the climax, but then
Mhm.
it's also setting everything up for the second arc.
Mm.
Um, it definitely was a lot. It makes me wonder if it made more sense to kind of, I don't know, divide some of it up maybe, or maybe we didn't have to go through everybody's story as far as their mental health crisis taken away from the other individuals.
Right.
But yeah.
And also, actually, to that point, it just dawned on me as well that um, each one going through an inner struggle can be very good for the story, and that's what served the previous books. But in this particular one, it kind of also made their physical journeys separate as well. You know, like they were
Mhm.
spending all our main cast that we've grown to love over these 4 books. We're spending so much time apart that they
Mhm.
barely even know each other. You know, for a lot of the pages, and I think
Right.
that it would have been really cool to see some more team ups or a bit more convergence from them being in the physical space together, you know, and
Absolutely.
more. I think I would have liked to see personally.
Mhm.
I mean, I'm
Yeah.
always for more team ups.
Yeah,
Like,
Yeah.
me too. Yeah, absolutely. And yeah, it was interesting how for the majority of Wind and Truth, everybody was kind of separated.
Mm-hmm.
And we've got everybody in the spiritual realm, and then we've got um, the middle realm. I forgot what it's called, the world of forms, or but anyway, yeah, it's very interesting how they were all. Oh, Shadesmar, sorry. There we go, Shadesmar. Yeah, so they were all kind of separated, and I think I've talked about before, so I won't spend too much time on it. But the therapy angle really grated on me after a while, or at least the Kaladin therapy angle. I'm like, okay. And by the way, where did we get the word therapy? That's an Earth term, unless Earth exists somewhere in the mythos of the Cosmere, and
I
Hoyd's
think
familiar with it.
I think Wit dropped it, but it was
Yeah,
very offhand.
yeah,
Um, but yeah, yeah, yeah.
yeah. But as far as the mental health journey, I feel like Shalon's journey has been uh, much more interesting and heartfelt, and um, has more realistic complexity to it
Mm.
than the thing between Kaladin and Zeth. That's just my personal opinion, but
We had a lot of interesting revelations for her this book.
we did.
Like with her mother being one of
Yeah,
Yeah.
the original, um, of the Oath Pact or
yeah,
whatnot.
one of the
Like,
heralds. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
yeah, that really changed a lot of things. It put a lot of things in perspective. The
Hmm.
fact that, um, and again, what they were trying to do to avoid the next desolation ended up leading to her, quote unquote, being killed and then sparking the next, um, really, really interesting. And eventually I'd like to get back and listen to them all again, knowing what I know now,
Right.
and kind of seeing those pieces. Yeah, yeah. Um,
Same. Yeah. I could just reading, especially the first 2 books again. You know, Way of Kings, Words of Radiance in the Stormlight Archive, and just to
Hmm.
now know about Sean's family dynamics and kind of where these threads come from. Oh man,
Hmm.
I'm sure we've so much that we are gonna reread and go. Oh, because I think about like Brandon Sanderson was so influenced by Robert Jordan, and Robert
Yeah.
Jordan is like the quintessential that. You know, it's like you read that prologue in the Wheel of Time again. I reread like
right.
first half of Eye of the World, and I was like, oh my god, this guy tells us like so much of what's going to happen in the 15 book series. We just don't know because we don't
Right.
Right.
know what we don't know yet, you know? So,
Yeah.
yeah, so cool.
On the topic of Shalon's mother, do you think the fact that she is the daughter of I guess the heralds would kind of be like demigods at this point. Do you think the fact that she's the daughter of a demigod has anything to do with having 2 shards? She's got pattern, and then two, yeah, what 2 shard
Spren.
blades. Yeah, two spren. Thank you. She's got pattern, and then she's got can't remember the other one's name, the Deadeye, or that's kind of slowly coming back
Oh yeah, yeah.
into consciousness. My what?
Was it Maya or Myra?
I think Maya is Adelin's.
Oh yeah,
Right.
that's right.
I can't remember the other one for her offhand, but she's got two spren, and I kind of wonder. I don't know if there's any correlation between that and being the daughter of a herald, but I'm very curious about it.
Yeah, and is it the nature or the nurture, right? Is having your mom be a herald and kind of encouraging those skills or qualities, or just the fact that you're a child of a herald. I don't see how it couldn't. And also kind of curious if there's one child of a herald, are there others out there?
Oh yeah.
Like, and how that plays into it. But yeah, we definitely had a lot of revelations with her, as well
Yeah.
as just the two shard blades or the two spren. Because I'm
Yeah.
trying to think back when we truly realized that there was two. Because like early on in the books, it's not quite transparent, and it could just be part of how she compartmentalizes her memories and you know um, herself.
Right.
But again, another thing that will make rereading it that much more interesting, because some of those things didn't make sense early
Yeah.
on if you really think about it. And the more you learned about the breaking of oaths and this, that, and the other, and how much of it was Shallan's fragmented memory and what she wanted to believe versus what happened, versus all of a sudden she has a dead eyes and
Yeah.
pattern.
If I remember right, didn't she realize that she had two shortly before the trial in Rhythm of War, the trial in Shadesmar?
That sounds right, because I feel like it wasn't clearly spelled out until the last couple books.
Yeah, I think it
Yeah.
was.
Um,
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
sounds about
Yeah.
right.
Okay. Yeah, I couldn't remember exactly, but that's going to be very interesting to watch. And like you said, Carl, to see if there's other children of heralds as well.
hmm
'Cause yeah, it would make sense if there's one there might be a couple more, and um, who knows? I'll be very curious to see what happens with that. Um,
You all think
As
we're gonna get a lot more of Shallan in the next books with her being trapped in that realm, and I'm curious to see how that, because it feels like it was left a little bit open ended,
it
but
was.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah,
good point.
now she has a kind of a method of communication. She's got a Sion,
Mhm.
hmm
which of course is from Elantris,
hmm
from the world of Cell. She's got a Sion, so she can communicate with Adolin kind of, even though there's still that time differential between between Shadesmar and
Roshar, or
and
the
Rashard,
physical plane.
yeah. So
Yeah.
yeah, she's kind of stuck there, and uh, I don't know about you, but did you guys catch that she's probably pregnant? That's the impression I got.
That
Yeah,
would
there.
definitely make it interesting.
Yeah,
Yeah,
because she just said, "I really need to talk to Adolin, and so I need to borrow this Sion and whatever." And I think she's pregnant.
yeah.
I could be wrong, but
I might have missed that. Though there was so much going on at the end of the book.
yeah.
But
Yeah,
that
she
would
didn't
definitely be
come right out
interesting.
and say it, but I just got the impression with the urgency of her communication to Adolin
Mhm.
hmm
that there's something there.
She also made I forget what the reference was again, because there's so much going on towards the end there, but she made some reference. God, I'll remember it probably right after this live stream, as things often. No, but she made like some sort of a subtle reference as well, in addition to that sense of urgency. About needing to speak to Adolin. So, yeah, I kind of gathered that same conclusion.
Okay. Yeah.
Kind of along the same lines. Adolin's story arc in this book, I really enjoyed. He's really grown and changed a lot.
He has, and I've he's honestly up to this point been one of my least favorite characters in the Stormlight Archive, but he really grew on me in this book.
Yeah.
Yeah, he really grew on me, especially with just, putting his life on the line because he was the only one left that could do it to save whatever remnant of what's the city name? I can't think of it right offhand, but to save what little he could of that city. And
I was worried there.
Thalinar.
Sorry, go ahead.
Thalinar, is that it? Sorry.
That sounds right. That sounds right. Yeah.
Go ahead. Sorry.
Oh, I was just going to say I was pleasantly surprised by his story arc, because there was a period, especially earlier on with what he did with Sadius and how much he was pushing up against Dalinar. I'm like, oh my goodness, like, is he going to have his own kind of like anti-hero arc, right? Is he going to lean more into where Shallan is with the Ghost Bloods and everything, for him to then kind of come back around and lean into himself more as a leader? And again, Brandon Sanderson does such a great job writing these characters where you can kind of see where they're coming from. They never really wanted to take on that mantle. And how he's a duelist, right? Well, now he's a duelist without his leg. That, if I'm remembering right, like there's no hope in sight of it being healed, right? At the end of the 5th book.
Right.
So how much that changes things for him.
Yeah, that will be interesting. It sounds like they can soul cast a leg for him, probably.
Okay.
But as far as him possibly getting the limb back, the only way he could do it is like Lopen, and that's if he, becomes a Radiant. But then he doesn't really want to do that, and I kind of wonder if it's going to be one of those situations where he's like, I don't care about the leg. I will learn to live with it, because I'm not worthy to be a Radiant. That's the perspective I get from him.
I could see that.
Yeah. But that'll be very interesting to see him go forward in the next series. If he does, I mean, I imagine he'll be probably in his 30s by the next time we see him in the Stormlight Archive. Because he seems like right about in his 20s right now. So, yeah.
I also felt like, in the previous books, he just didn't have as much of a character arc to, he wasn't dealing with some of the consequences and inner struggle that some of the other characters were dealing with in the same way. Because he had his gripes with Dalinar and all sorts of things, but it didn't really come to a head until this book. So you really got to see him deal with these consequences, whether physical with his leg or inner consequences or inner turmoil, I guess. I felt the same way. It was like he was like the redeeming character arc in this book.
Yeah, I enjoyed the storyline very much.
Definitely more of a pretty boy and a fashionista, and he was kind of, he wasn't worthless, but he was just kind of like, he was like one of those people that people just kind of ignore or roll their eyes at, and now he's really taking responsibility and because I mean he's he's the ruler at this point, as far as his family is concerned. Because
Mhm.
Gavinor, well, that's something to talk about, right? Gavinor, who knows what's going to happen with him? Odium really broke him.
That was interesting. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah,
I did
Yeah.
not.
yeah.
That same. That surprised me.
Yeah, I did not
Right.
expect it either. I was thinking, my impression was that Dalinar was going to become Honor, which he did for a short time, and then he would go up against Odium himself, and Odium would be his own champion. I was not expecting the Gavinor thing.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah, and the way, and I guess he basically formed a changeling for Yasna to take back to the real world,
right.
while
Hmm.
while Gavinor was just stuck growing up in the spiritual realm, and that just plays all kind of uh, mind twisting stuff on a kid.
Right.
Just
Right.
dark.
Yeah, it's very dark. Yeah, yeah. In fact, that was I thought that immediately upon reading it, Nikhil. I'm like, ooh, that took a dark turn.
Totally. Yeah, yeah.
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 What did you all think of the way it ended in general? I was curious to hear what you thought, like in terms of, with the Dalinar's decision, and was it what you expect in terms of like, you know, Odium essentially, winning the battle for
Right.
for the sake of the war, I guess you could say. But
Hmm.
It definitely wasn't what I was expecting.
hmm,
Yeah.
Um, I kind of seeing it now. I can kind of understand why Brandon took it the way he did.
Hmm.
As far as like getting us set up and everything. Um, but yeah, it was not what I was expecting. And as a reader, that is something I always get excited about.
Hmm.
Spending as much time as I have in the fantasy realm. I've read so many Lord of the Rings clones that, it just gets tiresome. That, when you get to the point where you can start writing it yourself, you're like, okay, yeah, this is fun. Um, but yeah, sorry,
totally.
Chaz, was it what you expected?
Oh, it definitely wasn't. As I thought on it after I finished the book, it made a lot of sense. If two gods go to war, it's going to destroy the planet. I totally get that angle and kind of why it happened, but yeah, it wasn't what I was expecting at all. At least there's some restrictions on him because the Oath Pact is back in place.
Yep.
Uh, then
Well,
go ahead.
oh, sorry. No, I was just gonna say, and now eyes are on him as well, like the
Yeah,
Cosmere extension, essentially.
yeah. Eyes are on him, and he's got another potential enemy now that Boato Mishram is released. So he's got a lot that he's going to have to deal with. But yeah, I was not expecting that to happen. I was not expecting Kaladin to become a herald, although that makes sense for him in the kind of the next step of his evolution.
Mhm.
And so
Hmm.
now that's just one more stake in the game against Odium. So, or sorry, Retribution now. Um, but yeah, it was very interesting the way it ended, and then some of the wrap ups as well at the end, like um, we have Hoyd and
Mhm.
his servant trying to communicate with Shalon. Which, by the way, did you guys pick up on the fact that his servant is a Khandra?
Oh, I don't know that I picked up on that.
Yeah, I just picked up on it briefly. I'm like, oh, wait a minute, he's a Khandra, and I don't remember what it was that clued me into it, but I remembered Brandon saying that there's Chondras on Roshar.
Well, we kind of get to see some of that towards the end of Mistborn era too,
Yeah,
right?
we do.
When
Right.
Wayne's girlfriend goes out into the Cosmere,
Yep. Yep.
right?
She does. Right. Yep.
Um, so that's exciting, and that might be interesting. Again, rereads, try to see if we can pick out who could potentially be a Chandra or
Yeah.
not. Um,
Yeah, that makes for an interesting twist on the entire Cosmere with characters that you don't know who they really are. Kind of like with Battlestar Galactica, right?
Mm.
Toward the end of this. Sorry, I don't. Have you seen it, Nikhil?
No, I actually haven't.
Have you seen it, Carl?
I have, I
Okay.
have.
Well, I won't spoil it then, but there's a similar there's a similar trope played with in Battlestar Galactica, and so you kind of don't know who's who at this point and who to trust, and that kind of amps up um, that caution factor.
Yeah.
Right, right.
Yeah.
And if you think about it, we know that the Ghost Bloods have been there for a while.
Hmm.
I'm trying to think if we really know how long, but like Shallan's childhood, at least, right? Because of the butler was a Ghost Blood. So like they've been
Mm.
established on Roshar for a while. So it would make sense Chandra are there. And it's also important for us to remember that that's two different factions at play,
Hmm.
right? Because Chandras are agents of Harmony, where the Ghost Bloods are agents of Kelsier.
Right. Yeah.
So,
Or are they?
good
Well,
point. Good
no,
point.
no, you're right. They are, but I guess we kind of wonder
They're
who.
allowed. They're allowed to act on their own as long as
Right.
it doesn't conflict with overarching orders, right?
Yeah. Right.
Yeah.
And that kind of goes back to the thing of who is Kelsier answering to, if he is. It's yeah,
Hmm.
interesting.
Right, because the Ghost Bloods were intertwined with oh the gosh, I'm having a brain fart here. Odium before he became Odium.
Oh, Rays.
Or
Oh
no,
no, never mind. You're yeah,
yeah,
yeah.
the
Before he
the
became Mordium,
yeah, the notebook or whatever when he had his moment of clarity and
hmm
all the predictions and everything. The Ghost Bloods were kind of involved with all that.
right.
Um, yeah.
Yeah,
You-
yeah. It's a lot. Sorry, go ahead, Nikhil.
Oh no, it just actually got me thinking. It's like we were talking about rereading, and these Cosmere catch up. Like watching discussions like this or participating in a discussion like this just whets my appetite to want to go and reread all of them. And I'm like, I wish I had the time to do that now.
Right.
But also think about like later on as the Cosmere further develops, and we have the time to reread some of these books. Like I wonder how the whole adventure will read, because so much of what we're discovering as we read through them in real time is the mystery and trying to
Hmm.
piece through together. But once the
Hmm.
threads are all kind of fleshed out, I would be very curious, to see if I have time to read like 30 books or whatever it ends up being when it's all said and done.
Yeah.
I would be curious to see, like, knowing all the information, what kind of series would it read from start to finish, um,
Hmm.
or maybe a side tangent question is for the people who join into the Cosmere later on in the game, when things have all been fleshed out and they can just go on to the next. What will
Hmm.
that reading experience be for them?
That's
Right.
true.
Hmm.
That's true.
Yeah.
Because some of the stuff like you were talking about earlier, we missed because it's been years at this point since we read
Hmm.
it.
Yeah.
So yeah.
Yeah.
It's one of the reasons why I love audiobooks. It's a lot easier for me to sneak some of that time in during adulting to just binge it. So
Yeah,
yeah.
that is definitely an advantage of the audiobooks for sure.
Mhm.
And yeah, it'll be very interesting to see where it goes. I'm especially excited for Ghost Bloods. to see, because I think that's going to open up a whole lot into the question of their allegiances in particular,
Mm-hmm.
and see where that goes, and hopefully we'll find out some answers and see what kind of new magics Brandon Sanderson brings in the next era of Mistborn, because
Yes.
kind of like you were saying, Nikhil, I think you're right. This is kind of on the cusp of like his version of the 80s maybe, and technology is just kind of starting to come to the forefront. We've got the space race, that whole era. So I think that's gonna be kind of his version of that. And I'll be very curious to see how he weaves magic into an era that's a little bit more technologically heavy.
Yeah.
Final Fantasy does it well, but I'll be curious to see how well Brandon does that. I'm open-minded though. I'm optimistic.
Very true. Very true. Don't want to derail us, but I know we're approaching kind of the end.
Yeah, we sure are. And there's a couple more comments here. Cliff popped in earlier saying hi. I don't know if he's still here, but glad to hear from you, man. And DK Moon has a comment about Mistborn. Okay. So yeah, so you read Mistborn first, and you're kind of new to Elantris and Warbreaker. Well, and Stormlight. So that's great.
You're in for a treat.
Yeah, you really are. Glad all is fresh for me. Yeah, it is kind of nice to have a built-in catalog of stories that you can read to enhance your understanding of the world. It's really nice.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Cough, George R. R. Martin. We need you to. But that is.
I could fill the last 5 minutes just ranting about that. So,
was there anything else that you guys specifically wanted to touch on before we do wrap this up?
I just had a comment with DK Moon. Like, as much as I love the series, the Cosmere would be something that, like, if I could pick something to just read fresh again, to go back and just not know anything and just experience it for the first time again, because it's amazing. And there's a reason why Mistborn is one of the series that I introduced to people who are kind of trying to get back into reading. And I got my brother Pete, who just wasn't that interested in reading or audiobooks for the longest time, and once he picked up on Mistborn, Cosmere all the way, like, just sucked in. Just such great writing.
Right.
And it's accessible for non-fantasy fans too. Like my sister, Mistborn trilogy, the first, era one. I don't think she's read any fantasy except for the Harry Potter books, and and she absolutely loved them, and so it's just one of those things that, because he does characters so well that, irrespective of the genre, it kind of transcends it, can appeal to people who are like, oh, I don't read fantasy, but they'll read Mistborn, so.
Right.
And I think a lot of that too is, the reason why Brandon Sanderson teaches people how to write fantasy is because a lot of times I feel other series, the magic, as incredible as it is, it's so complicated. You almost have a separate book or tome to keep track of stuff, or things contradict, where his magic system has a way of being complex while still an easy learning curve, right? Like, you don't have to know all the ins and outs of it to appreciate it, and it doesn't, like, dominate the story, right? It accessorizes it.
Yeah, that's very true. DK Moon says that they like it. They like Rhythm of War because of all the deep dives into the magic. So
I felt that because when I first read it, I felt actually a little overwhelmed by it. But I reread it, I think, a month before Wind and Truth came out, just to kind of refresh myself. And maybe it was just the expectations, or just, rereading it, not really thinking about that as much. But I actually really enjoyed that aspect of it in a different way.
Yeah, definitely. And the nice thing about his books is, at least with most of them, he has the what is it he calls it, the Ars Arcanum at the end of the book. So he's got that whole section where it goes deeper into the magic than you get in the actual story. I think that's really, really helpful.
Yeah.
Yeah. Weiss and Hickman did that with their Deathgate cycle, and that really helped kind of solidify that the magic in that world as well.
It also, takes the burden off the reader. It's like, okay, do I have to commit this element to memory, or can I just flip and reference, right? Or how does this work? Okay, they name drop this metal. What does that mean? Right? Like, it's been, I've slept since then. It's nice.
Yeah, it really is. Wayne says, has been interesting. Many thanks. Have a great one. Thank you so much for tuning in. And I think we will go ahead and kind of pull it to a close there. Thank you, everybody who tuned in. I hope this was helpful. I hope it didn't scare anyone away. And I just want to say a big thank you to Nikhil and to Karl for joining me today. This was a lot of fun, guys, and I really appreciate you.
Thanks for having me. It's been a blast.
Yeah.
Hopefully we can do it again here soon.
Yeah, hopefully so. Absolutely. Well, all right. Well, you guys, I don't love the Deathgate. Okay, that's fair. All right. Well, thank you very much, everybody. Have a great day and read more books.
Woo.